All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, the day before Friday. There we go. I can feel that. Yeah. So let's see here. There we go. There's my cursor. So Crazio's here. Good morning, Crazio. Crazio got vaccinated yesterday, so it's good for him.
Getting mine later.
You're getting yours
I think at 2.
at 2
Yeah.
today?
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else been vaccinated, or is that first dose or second? First? Andre? Not yet? No? Yo-ya? Not yet? Yeah? Yeah? What about Jim? Have you been vaccinated yet? Did you get vaccinated yet? Yeah? What about you, Daniel? No, not yet? No, I'm getting number 2 on Tuesday, I think, next week, so.
No school?
No, there'll be school. I'm getting it at like 4 in the afternoon. And I'll, excuse me, should be fine. Although my,
Sure you don't want to rest in the morning?
yeah, like, it might be really beneficial for my health if I do that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, what about the next day? Because the next day is the one that is already.
The second one?
Oh yeah.
Well, we'll see. My partner, she got her second vaccination yesterday afternoon, and yeah, she was feeling pretty sleepy last night and this morning. So I don't know. I'm not sure. She's at work now, so I'm not sure how she's doing. But
You should rest. Just to be safe.
she should rest, or I should rest.
You.
Should
Both
I-
of you guys should rest.
Should I text her and just ask her if
Yeah, how she's.
Okay, give me a second. My students want to know how you're feeling after your vaccination, and should I take the day off after my second dose? Laugh emoji. We'll see what she says. She's probably teaching, so I don't know if she'll. Yep.
What does he do?
She teaches grade 6 and 7. She this year she's teaching everything because of the way they split the grades because of COVID. But she usually does language arts, social studies. She's taught French before and computers, she's teaching math now, so she speaks Spanish, so she can teach that. So she can do a lot of things. But we'll see what she thinks. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to World War II. So I asked you to read this section yesterday, and it talked a little bit about the U.S. entering the war, right? Pearl Harbor. The Japanese will kind of sucker punch the United States when they're not looking. The United States won't be happy about that, and so they will declare war on both Japan and Germany. The section talked a little bit about the Battle of the Atlantic as well, and what is the Battle of the Atlantic?
For the control of the seaports.
Yeah, it's control of the sea, right? Because why is the Atlantic so important?
Everyone got their weapons.
Yeah, right?
Maybe the Allies, I think.
That's how the Allies are getting their weapons, right? So good morning, Sophie. So Britain is an island, right? Again, if you don't bring it there, you won't find it there, right? And so they've got to bring everything, they've got to ship everything in. And the Nazis know if they can cut the supply line, Britain will be finished, right? And so the Americans are shipping over all sorts of food and weapons and all sorts of supplies, and they are trying to protect those shipments. And how do they do that?
Air patrols, different routes, more protection while the transportation is happening, and sea.
Yeah. So they have a convoy system. There's air patrols. They're taking a bunch of different routes, right? They have the best technology they can, anti-submarine technology, right? Which is probably at that point sonar. Good morning, and torpedoes. And so I don't know if maybe no one else was thinking this, but I was just thinking like what a horrible way to die, like out in the middle of the Atlantic in a metal tube, and then you get hit by an Allied torpedo, and that's it, right? Like, ugh, awful. But lots of people die that way, right? Tens of thousands of soldiers die out there in the Atlantic, right? So we talked about that, and then we kind of touched on the Holocaust, right? And that's kind of, it's interesting how these things are sort of converging, because we've come to a place where we're talking about the Holocaust, we're talking about a genocide, and then yesterday we attended basically a memorial service for 215 young victims of another kind of genocide here in Canada. And so I want to come back to that and talk to it a little bit more, but I just want to give us a bit more of a foundation in genocide before we dig into that piece, right? So what we did yesterday will maybe make more sense or have a little more gravity once we talk about the things we need to talk about first, okay? So let's jump into that. So we said that Hitler had a long-standing hatred towards Jewish people, but we also said that he wasn't really alone in that, right? So anti-Semitism was pretty common in most of Europe at the time, right? So it's not just Hitler that hated Jewish people. There was a lot of people who didn't like them, right? And in part, I think that made it easier for him to do what he did, because there was such significant prejudice against Jewish people to start with. And I think I told you, what's up?
Why? How did it start?
Does anyone know where anti-Semitism starts?
That time when
The time when what?
the
Oh, well, that's sort of that's what kicks off that Kristallnacht, right? That's sort of the Nazis' sort of rampage and of brutalizing Jewish people in Germany. But anti-Semitism itself goes back hundreds of years, and I think part of where it goes back to is, well, there could be a few things. So Europe was predominantly Christian, right, in sort of the Middle Ages, if you will. predominantly Christian. And so the Jews, of course, are related to Christianity, but it's a different, kind of a different religion, right? I don't know if middle-aged Christians kind of held a grudge this way, but technically the Jewish people are responsible, not the Jewish people, Jewish elders in the Bible are responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, right? So any Christians here that know the Bible a little bit? Kind of?
Catholic, I studied the Bible.
Would you say you kind of know the story of Jesus and who he is? Yeah. Okay. So Jesus is crucified at the insistence of Jewish religious elders, right? I'm not sure if the Christians held a grudge against the Jews for that. Maybe not. But in Middle Age Europe, the church passes a law, and it says that Christians may not lend money to other Christians for a profit. Okay? So again, if Ben and I are both Christians and Ben needs a loan to start a small business, I can give him the money, but I can't charge him interest. Right? And
Kind of like that.
what's that?
I like that.
You like it, yeah. I don't like it so much. Am I going to lend my money out for free and risk losing it if you don't pay back? No, right? Awful. So, but what starts to happen is that Jewish people who are, living in Europe all over the place at the time, they are not held by such laws, right? Because they're not Christians. And so Jewish people become moneylenders, right? And has anyone ever read The Merchant of Venice? The Shakespeare play? If you ever read The Merchant of Venice, you'll see there's a character in The Merchant of Venice called Shylock. And Shylock is a Jewish person, and he's a moneylender. And he lends money to one of the other characters. I'm sorry, I read it like 20 years ago, so I don't remember it very well. But he lends money to another character because, again, he is allowed to, right? He can charge interest, and Christians cannot. So in sort of medieval Europe, or Renaissance Europe, there's no Christian moneylenders, but there are Jewish moneylenders, right? And so they're kind of cleaning up, right? They're making money, loaning their money out, making interest because they're kind of allowed to. And I think that's kind of where, they're kind of outsiders in most of Europe, right? They're immigrants. They're not Europeans. They come from somewhere else. They are lending money and kind of making money. They're sort of distrusted, I think, by the Europeans. And so I think anti-Semitism, has its roots all the way back hundreds of years ago in this sort of medieval or Renaissance Europe where the Jews were kind of foreigners. They weren't one of the sort of regular population, but they were kind of making money off it and making money in a way that Christians could not.
What was Hitler's necessary to be?
Well, I think Hitler kind of learned the anti-Semitism that continued, right? We said in social justice that.
That pissed him off that much?
Well, no, but we said that prejudices are hard to get rid of, right? They sort of work their way into society. They get passed down, and yeah, anti-Semitism exists today, but nobody's worried about Jewish money lending. Like, that's not even a thing anymore, right? But again, the prejudice sticks, right? The prejudice gets passed down. And so Hitler was like many other Jews, many other Germans, many other Europeans who had anti-Semitic views. But Hitler saw the Jews as a scapegoat, right? If you want to, the classic power move by many authoritarians is to find an enemy, okay? Frighten the people, and then position yourself as the savior, right? Be careful, Germany, because there's this Jewish Bolshevik plot to take us over, but I will save you, right? And that story again has been used by all kinds of authoritarian leaders, right? Try to find an enemy, get the population scared, and then position yourself as the savior, right? You will save them from whoever, right? Donald Trump did it. Who did he identify as villains? A lot of people. Mexicans, right? There were Mexican immigrants that he said they were all rapists and murderers, right? Horribly racist and not true. But again, he said, yeah, there's an enemy at the borders, but I will save you. Who else? What's that?
Somewhere in Middle East.
Yeah, people in the Middle East, right? He created an immigration ban on people from Muslim countries, right? The idea that, oh, Muslims are the enemy.
Not Muslim countries, but like Muslims in general.
Yeah, or Muslims in general, right? Muslims are the enemy, but I will save you, says Trump. Maybe not in so many words. What's that? Sure, and combining that with terrorism, right? There are terrorists everywhere, but I will save you, right? Who else has been the enemy? Not Russia. China, right? So Trump has tried to position China as the enemy, right? And I'll save you from China. Of course, then he met with Xi Jinping and he was his best buddy. But before that, he had positioned China as the enemy, right? We should. Yeah, right. It is interesting how, in some ways he didn't position the virus as an enemy, right, and him as the savior. Yeah, I think he didn't really know how to manage that, how to manage that story.
His racism just got through there.
Could be. The other thing is that the virus doesn't really obey any rules, right? Like Trump can antagonize people by tweeting about them, right? He knows how to poke people and get them to react, but yeah, coronavirus doesn't react to his tweets, right? So he can't play the same game with it. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, anti-Semitism goes way back, right? Hundreds of years. And so Hitler's views on Jewish people are not strange for the time. Lots of people hold them, but he takes them to the extreme, right? He identifies them as the enemy. He uses that in part to gain power, but then he goes on a full-scale extermination of them, and others, of course. And so, again, the propaganda of the time is there to do just that, right? To identify the Jewish people either as frightening monsters who are oppressing Germany, or as pests, right? As parasites, as some sort of pest to be gotten rid of, right? Now, again, this is what happens to the Jewish people here in Nazi Germany is called genocide. And the term is kind of invented after the war. And so when the Allied armies kind of come into Germany, sort of Britain and the US and Canada from the west, and the Soviets come in from the east. When they come into Germany, they actually encounter some of these camps. Some of them have already been destroyed by the time that Germany is kind of conquered, but some of them are still in existence. And so the world is kind of shocked by what they find there, and rightly so, right? These are camps that are built to efficiently exterminate them, right, in the most brutal fashion. And I don't know about you, but yeah, like the idea of gassing people to death and then incinerating their bodies and then selling the ashes to put on the roads in the winter is just like, holy cow, right? Like brutal. And so after the world kind of learns about this, the UN gets together and they pass a genocide convention, right? So they actually define what this crime is, because before there's no definition for these kind of activities. It's not like they didn't happen before, right? So the Holocaust is not the first genocide. It definitely wasn't the last.
First on that scale.
It was large scale, it was efficient, and it was really in people's faces, right? So the Allies kind of discovered this, and of course they splashed it all over the newspaper headlines all over the world, and suddenly everybody knew, the scope of what had happened, right? And so this is what the UN said that genocide was, okay? They said that it's systematic harm or killing of members of a national or ethnic or racial or religious group. Okay? So you can kill these people, you target a group, you can just outright kill them, you can impose living conditions to bring about their physical destruction. Okay, so you impose conditions on them that eventually causes them to die out. You can prevent people in their group from giving birth to new members, or you can transfer members out of the group and kind of raise them as your own. Okay? In any or all of these ways, one group will eventually cease to exist, right? Whether you kill them or sterilize them or somehow create a condition where they will disappear, right? That's genocide, right? The destruction of a group of people. Shockingly, as I said, the Holocaust is not the first genocide, but it's definitely not the last, right? And as you can see here, there have been 43, and actually this is an old statistic because it's 5 years old. There's been more than 43 genocides that have occurred since the Holocaust. Right? Can you name any of them? Any genocides? Yeah, so we'll talk about that, right? What happens to indigenous people here in Canada and the United States. We'll talk about that as a genocide for sure. Any others? Yeah, the Tutsi and the Hutu in Rwanda in 1994. Yeah, that's one that Canadians know more about because Canada had a little bit of a role to play. The head of the UN peacekeeping force was a Canadian, and he became a Canadian senator. So we have a little connection to it, and so we had some more exposure to it. So Rwanda is known by Canadians and by others. Any others that you can think of?
I'm not sure, like, is the terrorist attack count as a genocide?
Say what?
Like ISIS.
Oh.
Count it as a genocide? That's just pure terrorism.
Yeah. So there's a difference, right? Because do you know, how would you define terrorism to me? Not sure. It's a word that gets used a lot, right? What? Does somebody want to Google it? Did you Google it, Sophie, or?
Terrorism?
Yeah. What are they?
Striking fear in people.
Yeah.
On a large scale, from now on.
Right. There's one more piece to it, though. So acts to create fear in a group of people, and in pursuit of political ends, right? So that's what makes something terrorism, right? You're pursuing some sort of political goal, right? If you're not doing that, sometimes it's just mass violence, right? So you can have something that's a hate crime, right? So you can have hate crimes, things that are kind of motivated by people's race or religion or gender or sexuality. You can have terrorism that was brought about that is violence for political purposes or sometimes to inspire fear. And then you have genocide where you're actually trying to destroy an entire group of people.
What in Turkey?
Yeah.
Armenian genocide.
The Armenian Genocide in Turkey, that's one.
700,000?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's been a lot of terrorism, right? There's been a lot of hate crimes, but there's been a lot of genocide too, right? And 50 million people have died since the end of World War II. That's 5 times the number of Jewish people that die in the Holocaust, right? So, sorry, 10 times. So what I want to do is have just a slightly more in-depth look at genocide, not particular genocides, because there's lots of them you can look up, but more appropriately how they work. Because as you'll read very shortly, genocides are not accidents, right? They don't just happen. And they're not unpredictable either. In fact, they are very predictable if you are paying attention. And so what I wanted to do is just read this short article that will take us through the steps of a genocide. Because again, they're not accidental, they shouldn't be surprising, and they don't just happen out of nowhere, right? They come out of a certain process. So again, what I'll ask you to do here is read this article. It's in Microsoft Teams. It's called The 8 Stages of Genocide. I have a few questions for you to answer here if we can. And then we can kind of bring in the First Nations idea. But let's start with this one, okay? So it's in Microsoft Teams, 8 Stages of Genocide. I'll give you some time to read, okay?
When they defined genocide, was it still the League of Nations, or did they already disband and was the United Nations?
Already disbanded, and this is the real, not the real, but the United
Current
Nations.
one, it's
Yes.
still the United Nations.
Yes.
Did they disband right after the war? Or a few months
It was probably, I don't know the history of the League of Nations very well because it's just not very effective. They're still around in the almost the mid-30s, so I think maybe kind of once World War II gets into full swing, I think it just kind of comes apart. I think.
It's
April of
46, maybe?
for the League of Nations?
Yeah,
Or maybe.
December,
Maybe that's.
if I remember correctly.
You might. That's a date that I don't kind of have off the top of my head. So you might be right. Okay, all good to talk about these? All good? All right. So, as the author is arguing here, and as I mentioned before, genocides are not an accident, right? They actually take a lot of organization and planning, and so if people are paying attention, they can see the signs before things become violent and dire, right? And so there's these stages of classification and symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, extermination, denial, right? You could probably make a rap out of all of those. They kind of rhyme, but you shouldn't. Nobody will appreciate a genocide rap, I promise you. So you may have been thinking, or as you read, that some of these things appear in Germany, right? We see these things happening, and so how do some of these stages appear or manifest themselves in Nazi Germany?
There's hate propaganda.
Yeah, there's a lot of hate propaganda. So what stage does that kind of fall under? It could be a couple. Symbolization, why do you say that?
Because he symbolized the Jew.
Yep.
Maybe that's like a Chinese Muslims.
Yeah, so
Classification as well.
what's that?
Classification.
Classification, yeah. So the classification one is an earlier stage, right? And it's where we kind of, we have different groups in society. And so really most societies fall into that category, right? We have
Like
different,
that's a natural thing.
yeah, we have different groups of people living in society. We recognize different groups, and so that's mostly normal, right? But yeah, the symbolization thing is a little bit different. And here we kind of see a little bit of symbolization, right? The use of,
I feel like that's a bit of dehumanization as well.
yeah, exactly, right? So maybe not so much this one, but definitely this and this are dehumanization, right? And symbolization. So we see the Star of David is used, right, as a symbol for the Jews, and we know later the Jews are going to be asked to wear a Star of David in public so that everybody knows who they are. But there's also dehumanization going on here. And again, the dehumanization can kind of go up or down, right? Here, the Jews are being portrayed as more than human, right? Some sort of immortal, horrible monster sort of thing. But they can also be portrayed as less than human, right? And so here we have Jewish people as bugs, lice, parasites, right? Things to be exterminated without a second thought and without mercy, right? And so, yeah, we see a little bit of symbolization happening here, a little bit of dehumanization, right? What else? How else do some of these stages manifest in Germany?
There was organization as well. Like when Hitler was rounding up all the Jews and bringing the pure Germans into the capital.
Yeah. So he's sorting people out, right? He's trying to bring the sort of pure-blooded Germans back into Germany. He's kind of confining Jewish people to ghettos, right, to poor neighborhoods. Like I said, he's cutting off their access to public services, right? He's separating them out, right? He's organizing people. What else? Definitely, yeah, definitely the extermination happens, right? And so we know that concentration and death camps are created, and what? The Kristallnacht is actually, that's maybe not extermination, but that's
It's a purge, I think.
what's that?
It's more of a purge.
It's a bit of a purge, but it's kind of more. I don't know.
I don't think it was planned. Like, it was gonna happen, but not yet. That was kind of like, you pissed me off again.
Well, I think could we say that it might fit into the organization category, where
Maybe a bit of preparation as well.
yeah, right. So again, I think you're right. It's an unplanned, unexpected occurrence, but
Basically, that's training.
yeah, it's a bit of training, right? But it's also a little bit of
Polarization.
there's some polarization as well, right? Where, the severe reaction sort of pushes the Jews kind of further to the edge of society, right? You don't belong here, and this is how much you don't belong here, right? Anything else? Other stages?
Actually, was there any denial? I don't think he denied anything.
Well, it was certainly hard to deny after the fact, right? Like a lot of times what happens is, when a genocide happens, the country itself remains intact, right? So Nazi Germany is different because there was this genocide occurring, and then Germany was invaded by both sides, from the Western Allies and from the Soviet Union, and then they saw the horror of what was going on. But if you look at a country like Rwanda wasn't invaded by anyone, right? The genocide kind of came to a close, and then that was kind of it, right? Sorry, Mark, were you going to say something?
Yeah, like, is it a denial for example, the Hitler is going to claim that, oh, it's not a massacre, it's just only a race purification, to deny, like, to brainwash them, like, the people in Germany, that it's not a massacre?
Well, denial can come in all kinds of forms depending on the situation.
He survived long enough to get to that stage.
He did not. He did not survive long enough to deny. But in other places, sometimes it's dismissed as, oh, it was a civil war, right? It's not a genocide, it's just a civil war. Never happened, don't know what you're talking about. Maybe all these people just left, right? It was inhospitable climate and they all emigrated. We don't know where they went, whatever, right? So there's often attempts to deny, and even still today, there are people who deny the Holocaust, who say that it's all a hoax, never happened, right? And actually, there's a fairly famous case in Alberta, where I come from, where a teacher was actually teaching that to his students.
Really?
He was teaching his students that the Holocaust was a hoax, never happened. But he was removed. This was decades ago, it was a long time ago. But but there are still people who feel that, it's all made up. Look how many Jews there are still around. Couldn't have been a genocide. So many of them, right? And but there's evidence of it, and part of the job of the UN or other organizations after the fact is to make sure that the genocide is documented, right? Because people will try to deny it, right? Countries will try to destroy the evidence. When I was at university, I had a professor who, he was actually on my master's committee as well. He chaired my master's committee. Really sweet guy. Excellent forensic or biological anthropologist. And he was actually part of a UN team that went to Rwanda shortly after the genocide, and he went there with this team to do just that, to document what had happened, right? Because again, we know that once a genocide is over, people will try to destroy the evidence. People will
How did the world find out about the genocide
in Rwanda? Well, without going too deep into it, unfortunately the world knew all too well what was going on, but nobody really had the will to act. And so part of the story, the reason Canadians know about this, again, because the head of the UN peacekeeping force was a member of our military, Romeo Dallaire. And Romeo Dallaire was in Rwanda, saw these stages happening, and was kind of ringing the alarm bell to the UN and to other nations saying, hey, we're going to have a big problem here if you guys don't intervene. Like, things are, the tension is mounting and it's going to get ugly. And unfortunately, nobody did anything until it was well after too late. And so, hundreds of thousands of Rwandans died while, the international community kind of argued because they didn't want to, they just didn't really want to get involved that much. And so, again, hundreds of thousands of Rwandans are killed, and the Romeo Dallaire story is about him being in Rwanda and like being on the phone saying, hey, like people are killing each other in the streets. You need to send me more. You need to send reinforcements. You need to show up here with a military presence to separate these people out and stop the killing. But nobody was really too interested in doing that, sadly. Yeah, so denial will happen as well, and it happens in Nazi Germany before the Allies kind of arrive, because some of these camps are destroyed ahead of time, right? They didn't have time to destroy them all, but some of them were torn down, buried over, in an attempt to hide them. Yeah, then they were discovered later, but there was an attempt to hide what had happened. Right? Let me see, where was I? Nope, wasn't there. There we go. Maybe I'll ask you, let's take a break first, and then we'll answer this question. By the way, my partner here has texted back, and she said, as to your request for the day off, she said she's feeling great. Her arm hurts a bit, but she didn't have to take anything. Last time she took some Tylenol because she was sore, but she hasn't taken any Tylenol, so she feels good. And says she thinks that everyone should have a vacation after their second dose, but only if you still get paid, and only if you guys send her chocolate.
Sure.
Sure.
Make or break, yeah.
Yeah?
Make or break.
Okay, I will. You just bring the chocolate to me, and I will pass it on to her.
I'll get some for you as well.
Okay, well, hopefully she'll share. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about these other three, okay? Okay, and we are back. So I've got 3 questions for you here, in addition to the first one. And the second one is this: how do you think that this genocide happens, right? Because again, I think it's easy to understand that, okay, Hitler is just a bad guy, right? He's an evil person. You know, he wants to destroy all of these people. He has no regard for human life. I think that's easy enough to understand. But how do we understand everyone else, right? Because you can't kill 5 million people on your own, right? You need a lot of help. A lot of people need to participate in this genocide in order to get it to happen, right? So how is it that Hitler manages to do this? Why do people participate in this completely horrible event?
Shared hatred.
Shared hatred, right? But again, can you imagine, like, think about, I'll come to you in a second, Mark. Think about the thousands and thousands of Germans who are required to, you know, be prison guards, to build the prisons, to build the gas chambers, to, you know, catalog all of these Jewish people and put their names on lists and, you know, get rail cars and load them all in there and drive the rail cars to the camps, and then people to clean out the incineration chambers and, you know, drive away with these crates of ashes or whatever it is. Like, this requires a lot of cooperation, right? And it's not just, you know, it's not just 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. There's a lot of people involved in making this happen. But how is that possible? Like, maybe Hitler's evil, but is everyone evil?
Yeah.
Does everyone hate the Jewish people just that much?
You know, but I feel like Hitler is like, do this or die.
Okay, so that's might be part of it, right? So I think he said that in the documentary, right? He said that, you know, anyone who, you know, opposes the will of the state needs to be destroyed, right? And I'm not quoting him exactly, I forget his words, but he did say something like that, did he not? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone standing in the way of the state needs to be destroyed, right? So it's kind of a do or die situation for most Germans, but I don't know, would you participate in something like this?
I mean, I wouldn't oppose it. I would try to piss it off.
Yeah.
I think like Ben said, like shared hatred, but like to execute all that, you need someone like to speak up to you, to convince you, like, to put that ideology in your mind. Because not even the Nazis only, even in Rwanda, the things that happened was like there were people who shared that, all of them they shared the hatred, but didn't know what to do with it, nothing. And then there was this guy, he talked to them all, and convinced them to like kill all of them,
Right.
all of them.
So it's like it's like a leader like Hitler gives them
Of course.
a voice and maybe like something to do with all of that feeling.
Standing like this Hitler was a good public thing.
Sure, right? And he worked very hard to demonize Jewish people, right? He worked very hard to convince the Jewish public that not only should you hate them, but they should be destroyed, right? And yeah, maybe some people were partway there already, but he fueled the fire, right? He pushed people all the way into extreme. Yeah, I think there's something there for sure, Andre. Mark, what were you thinking?
I think like using brainwashing the people, because like Germany has a lot of people who trust Hitler with no doubt, according like about like the youth, the Nazi youth, and then the normal people. But like when Hitler say something about like oh Jews should be exterminated, so many people would trust him and then would find it out and everything. And he also used like of like brainwashing by the through the propaganda.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes the genocide.
Yeah, yeah, definitely effective use of propaganda, right, and of hate speech. And again, keep in mind that many German people already have negative prejudices about Jewish people, right? So he's not saying the seagulls are the problem, right? And the population are like, who cares about seagulls, right? They're just white birds, right? People already negatively think of them anyway, so it's easier to kind of
Yeah, plus
push them that
people
way.
already dehumanize them so much that most of the people, I think, they just viewed it as not killing humans, but like something inhumane.
Yeah, that's an important thing too, right? And I don't know, I don't know if you would agree with me or not. Maybe this is, I'm not sure if this is scientific fact. Maybe it's just my belief, but I believe that humans don't want to kill other humans, right? There's a pretty instinctive, it is very difficult for a human to kill another human. And so if you want to kill one or a bunch of them, you have to make them not humans somehow, right? You need to put them either below or above you,
That's
right?
what the child itself had that moment.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely part of, it's been part of military training in the past, right? The dehumanization of the enemy, because it's much easier to kill them when you don't see them as people like you, right? You kind of see it happen in lots of big action movies as well. So if you watch like Star Wars or the Avengers movies, remember in Infinity War when they have the battle at Wakanda, right? So, the Avengers are like kicking butt and killing all sorts of things, but they're killing those creatures, right? And again, those creatures are not human, right? So it's easy to watch our heroes cut them down because they're not really humanoid, right? Same thing in Star Wars. In the Star Wars movies, lots of times they use robots, right? Because the Jedis with their lightsabers, it's easy to just cut droids apart and nobody cares, right? But if they were human beings, it's not as comfortable, right? So movies like that, fantasy movies, will sometimes dehumanize the enemy as well because it's easier to see them killed, right? It's easier to see them cut up. And so, yeah, the dehumanization and the propaganda has a big role to play. The sort of, I think like Andre mentioned, the sort of giving people an outlet for that hatred, right? Giving them a way to express it, maybe part of it. But Ben, you said it's a do or die thing too, right? People, if you could not stand in the way of the Nazis after a certain point, right? And to do so would be to wind up in one of those camps yourself. Has anyone seen the movie, or maybe read the book? It's called The Book Thief. You read it or seen the movie? Movie? Movie's great, hey? But the tension in that movie is unreal, right? Because that German family is hiding.
Stressed out.
What's that?
I was stressed watching it.
It's super stressed, right? Because German family is hiding a young Jewish man in their basement, right? And there's patrols through the streets. Their house could be searched at any moment. Their neighbors could all spy on them and turn them in. Like, yeah, the tension, it makes for a great movie, but the tension is just like insane, right? And so, again, there's a lot of pressure to simply conform, right? Do what the government tells you because you don't want to get arrested, right? You don't want to go to a camp yourself. And again, that anyone who stands in the way of the state needs to be destroyed, right? That's a pretty clear message. If you were there, what do you think you would do? Like if you were,
I was German and I was a Jew.
let's say you're a German. Yeah.
Okay.
Would you? Would you go along with it? I mean, I'd very, like for me, I'd very much like to say, I'd be part of the resistance, right? I'd never go along with this. This is awful, right? I would find a way to oppose this, right? I would not go along with it. But I don't know, right? It's a pretty extreme situation for everybody, right?
I mean, right now everyone can say that they won't take part in it, but if you were there, that's fine. You're definitely doing what he says.
Yeah, it's tempting and easy to try to imagine yourself doing the honorable thing, right? But and some people did, right? Some people did, but lots of people died. Well, or were too scared to, or didn't really know what was going on, or didn't want to know what was going on, right? I mean, I'm sure that this stuff wasn't front page news on German newspapers. 5,000 more Jews killed today. I'm sure they weren't publicizing it, right? So people, if people didn't want to know, they probably didn't have to, right? And again, maybe that's what people did, right? They just kind of kept their heads down, didn't ask too many questions. Even questions are probably not looked upon well by the German authorities, right? And so you just keep your head down and try and do your job and try to stay safe, right? Because it's dangerous for everybody, right? The fascist government is dangerous to Germans as well if they step out of line.
Japan kind of did the same thing.
Um,
Like not genocide, but they captured a lot of British soldiers.
there was
There were more torture camps than
there was certainly a lot of brutality that went along with the Japanese invasion of China and into Southeast Asia. That's been pretty clearly documented. Unfortunately, that's goes along with warfare sometimes, even though those are technically war crimes. But you often see that kind of brutality. And again, when you train a bunch of soldiers to dehumanize, the enemy so that they can kill them, it's hard to, well, I shouldn't say it's hard to, but, maybe it's not surprising that they continue to dehumanize them once they capture them, right? Because they already see them as less than human, and so, people don't start treating them as human once you capture them, right? But still, I'm not explaining it away, but definitely true. Why do you think, this doesn't come up, but the Allied powers, when they discovered some of these camps and they found people still in them, they didn't free them immediately from the camp and turn them loose. Why not?
They wanted proof to show the world.
Okay, there was maybe an attempt to document what was going on, for sure, and there's some pretty heartbreaking photos and video footage that comes out of.
Yeah, that wouldn't be possible if they wasn't free immediately.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of a dick move, but
Well, and why else? Why else wouldn't they have just opened the gates and let them run away?
the Jews might not know what's going on.
Sure.
They might think,
Well, what is going on?
like, I think they were in the camp for so long, no news, no nothing. They don't know that the war is over.
Sure, they don't know what's going on outside. They don't know that the war. Well, and even if the war isn't entirely over,
Yeah.
are people in Germany going to be friendly to them?
No, definitely.
No, right? Do they have anything anymore? No, right? They've been stripped of all of their identification, their clothing, their possessions. They have no money.
They're going to come out fighting for sure.
Yeah, they have nowhere, but they have nowhere to go, right? And they have nothing, right? So you can't just open the gates and say, go and be free, right? Because you're setting them loose in a country that's still inhospitable to them, and they have nothing. And of course, they're all, weak and sick and malnourished. And so, I mean, strangely enough, when the Allies get there, the camp becomes the safest place for them, right? They're not locked in anymore. They're being protected while the Allies can kind of care for them, right? Feed them, give them medical attention, document the situation.
And I think like the Allies don't have enough spirit, power, or soldiers to rescue the Jews.
Well, and again, to rescue them and to do what with them, right? There's nowhere for them to go, right? There's nowhere. They don't have homes anymore, and parts of Germany have been destroyed in the process of the war. So, yeah, like you can open the gates, but like to where will these people go? Right? Last kind of opinion question. What do you think? Were there opportunities to stop this? Because that's what the article that we just read says, right? They argue that there are these steps to genocide, and you can interrupt the steps, right? You can try to stop a genocide before it happens in all of these different ways, right? So could this have been stopped earlier?
I guess so, but it wasn't because like everyone was so busy trying to rebuild the economy after the Great Depression that they were like, maybe he's just trying to get most to do a transfer and let him be.
It's true. People were distracted with their own problems.
And they didn't know about this until like the whole war was over.
That's true. Does anyone know about that? About what the Allies did and didn't know about what was going on in terms of the Holocaust? No?
I mean, it's hard to tell, but from what they said, they didn't know about the Holocaust until they beat Germany.
Yeah, I could be wrong about this, but I think that they had some idea, but I think it was more like rumors and things like that the Allies.
They didn't know where they came from.
Well, no, and how, like, if you hear, in 1942 or 3, if you hear the rumor that, by the way, the Germans have built all these camps in which, they're gassing and incinerating and exterminating Jewish people at the rate of 12,000 humans a day, like, that's quite a story, right? Like, we know it to be true now. But at the time, if you just heard that as a rumor with no...
I mean, they could take it as like a false rumor to try and distract them from the Battle of the Atlantic.
Well, yeah, I guess the question is what could they do about it at the time, right? They were already fighting a war with Germany. They couldn't get to the camps yet because they couldn't get in. So at that point, they couldn't do anything. It was too late. But again, if you hear that rumor, like, do you believe it? It's a pretty wild story. And again, we know it to be true now, but imagine if you didn't know it was true.
I don't think I would. Yeah, because of the Treaty of Versailles. Like, it's like, no way with that treaty you're doing this kind of thing, that ideology.
Even,
just carry on with your life.
but even without that, it's just such a monstrous thing to do. Like, even if you heard that rumor, like, could you believe it at the time? Or was it like, no, that's just people talking. That cannot be true. And I think certainly when the Allies arrived at those camps, they were shocked at what they saw. And so it's hard to it's hard to know kind of where, how much they knew and how much they believed. But again, like, it was already happening, right? And so in the 8 stages of genocide that we read, if you look at the extermination phase, the remedy for that is military invasion, basically, right? You send in your armies to separate out the two sides, to protect the people who are being targeted, and then you try to resolve it that way. So the Allies were kind of already doing that at the time, right? So I'm thinking beforehand, before this whole thing got started. Could it have been...
The propaganda phase, like the classification phase.
Yeah, right?
Dehumanization phase.
Yeah, that phase of symbolization and dehumanization, that's an alarm bell should be going off, right? When you see one group talking about another group as like insects or rats or vermin, people that need to be exterminated, alarm bell, right? That's
Yeah,
that's bad news, right? You're already on step 3 or 4,
But this was, the 8 stages was derived after the Holocaust. So,
right? Yeah, so these stages and even the definition of genocide come after the Holocaust, right? So prior to, let's say 1939, when the war starts, prior to then, people aren't really thinking about genocide as a thing anyway, because it's not really been defined the way that we're reading it.
I
There was
don't think people knew what to call it.
probably not, right?
Or like maybe they didn't think this kind of thing on such a big scale would ever exist.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think people would have.
I think that could be one of the main reasons why they didn't believe it.
Yeah, it is difficult to believe, right? Even now, this is what I'm saying. It's difficult for me to imagine, like, the level of brutality and just like the amount of people that need to cooperate in order to make something like this happen, right? And it's even hard to believe now, even though I know it to have occurred. It's difficult now, and at the time, like yeah, how could you process such information, right? But yeah, like the dehumanization phase is an alarm bell, right? That's and I've since I have heard of other political leaders, calling opponents or calling certain groups of people, or using terms that are dehumanizing, right? And that scares me when I hear it, right? Because it's the start of something bad, right? If it continues unchecked, then yeah, these people will be destroyed one way or the other. Right? The other thing we should point out too is that at the time, countries were very hesitant to involve themselves in the affairs of other countries, right? So anything going on in Germany with the Jews, well, that's a German issue, right? That's a domestic issue. We're not getting involved, right? And so lots of countries did that. They kind of turned a blind eye because, oh well, that's Germany's issue. That's none of our business, right? And I think, does that still happen today, do you think? Do countries just kind of ignore what other countries do?
Not really.
Not really.
Or you can see US.
Yeah. It's like anyone builds a nuclear build fine.
Anyone builds a nuclear what?
A nuclear weapon, then the US will build 5 just in case,
Right. So there's attempts to intervene in other countries in terms of nuclear weapons, right? So there's the Iran nuclear deal where the U.S. and other countries made an agreement with Iran to not develop nuclear weapons, right? And in exchange, the U.S. and other countries would drop their sanctions that they had put on Iran, right? Although I think that deal is in jeopardy because of Donald Trump, but we'll see.
Biden's problem now.
Well,
Hopefully
yeah.
he does something good about it.
I don't know where they are. I remember reading a couple weeks ago that the inspectors weren't being given access to the kind of records that they needed. So I think currently Iran is not cooperating. But who can blame them? Because Donald Trump just screwed it all up and kind of tore up the agreement. So again, why would Iran comply with it? But hopefully they're able to mend that fence because we don't need any more nukes. Well, yeah, definitely not, right? So but I don't know. We don't really intervene in other countries very much, I would say, right? Maybe sanctions, I think, is as far as we go, right? Economic sanctions.
Yeah.
But we don't really involve ourselves too much in other countries, except maybe the Americans.
I think other than that, most countries are in check. Like no one wants another war.
No, but we have conflicts that have gone on very recently all around the world in which we, Canada could have played some sort of role.
But usually people, you sit down and talk.
Yeah,
Back
but
then it was just like, you know what, I'm gonna do this.
but the problem is sitting down and talking is nice, but if you're not going to back it up with military action, people don't, or maybe sanctions. People don't listen, right? You can talk all you want, but unless you have leverage, they'll listen to you, but they won't do anything, right? You have to have power, right? You have to have some way to kind of make them do what you want, or at least hurt them if they don't. Well, then so could the Holocaust have been averted? Maybe not while it was happening, but in the years prior.
You mean now?
I don't think so.
I mean, like if you were,
I mean, if you take away the Great Depression, then maybe.
okay, like if you're the president of Great Britain, Prime Minister of Great Britain in 1936, is there anything that can be done?
You can stop it.
Well, they did appease him, right? They did give him a lot of things that he wanted and didn't get in his way until.
Yeah, if they did get in his way, then probably. Maybe not stop the whole Holocaust, but downscale it by a lot.
Maybe, right? I mean, it's interesting to think, would there have been a Second World War, right? What if he reoccupied the Rhineland, which was his first kind of thing that he did? And what if the Allies immediately stepped up and said, hey, back in your borders or you're going to have trouble right now, right? He was scared of that. He thought the Allies were going to oppose him. And I wonder what would have happened if they had stood up and said, you have 48 hours to remove your forces or we are coming in, right? Might have been a totally different story.
Might be different right now.
What's that?
Everything might be different.
Everything might be different right now, right? So those were pretty, the appeasement of Hitler was a pretty big series of choices, right? Not to confront this guy. And again, eventually he made it impossible not to, but it's interesting to think, right? What if people stood up to him immediately and said,
Enough is enough.
you have terms of your treaty, comply or else, right?
I think he would have complied.
I don't think he was in a position to fight a major war, but then I don't think anyone was.
Yeah. Britain and Franklin didn't prepare the war at all.
No.
No, they were all emotionally, economically crippled.
Yeah. Maybe you might have been right the first time too. They might have been emotionally crippled as well. But yeah, nobody was really ready to fight a war. But I don't know, maybe it's the best time. I'm not sure. It's impossible to know, right? It's impossible to know what would have happened. But
I feel like Hitler was planning to already have the war.
I think he was planning it.
The way he was building the Nazis up.
But I don't think he was entirely ready. But again, neither was anyone else.
I mean,
So
if he was fully ready, he might have won.
true. Very true. Right. And again, I think that the textbook mentions that, with maybe better leadership or better coordination, they may have been more successful, right, than they were.
But thank God they weren't.
Thank God they weren't. But yeah, it's a scary thought, right? Okay, so that went a little longer than I meant to, but that's okay. Tomorrow is our second quiz. So again, if you're an in-class person, show up here at 11 and you can write. If you're an online person, I'll talk to you starting at about 10:05, okay? Other than that, I think I will, yes.
The first quiz versus
Oh shoot, I gotta hand it back.
Yeah.
I got it right here. Okay. I'll hand it back to you. So, I'm gonna end the live stream now. Have a nice afternoon, online people, and we will see you tomorrow. Okay? So, bye.